Hook, what would you do if you were tempted by a fortune laid bare, with no one watching, except your own conscience? For Thomas Mitchell, being a billionaire didn't mean he was immune to disappointment or betrayal. Years of wealth had built not only his empire, but a fortress around his heart, a heart wounded by deceit, ever searching for someone truly honest. Tonight, he had orchestrated an experiment that would shake the foundation of his beliefs, and it all began with a 6-year-old child clutching her mother's hand. Thomas remained nearly motionless in his sumptuous leather armchair, the epitome of executive luxury, his gaze trained on the wide-open safe. Bundles of cash spilled from its depths, more money than most would see across generations. His test was clear: would temptation win over honesty? The office echoed with a hush as Diana, his loyal cleaning lady, gently nudged the door open, leading her daughter Jasmine by the hand. It was late, the kind of hour when the world outside slept, but inside Mitchell Enterprises, history was about to be made. Little Jasmine, a wisp of a girl with serious eyes and a smile that could light up night, wore bright pink gloves, her favorite, and a symbol of her determination to help her mother. Diana's gift had made cleaning an adventure, turning routine into shared memory. For 2 years, Diana had navigated the labyrinth of late-night shifts, always with her daughter at her side during school holidays, both silent witnesses to the workings of the vast financial machine Thomas had built. Tonight was different. It wasn't just a regular night shift. Tonight, Thomas watched with unblinking focus as Jasmine entered, her gaze inevitably drawn to the safe and its gleaming contents. This was what he needed: proof, one way or another, of the goodness that might still exist in people. Thomas's motivation for the test ran deep. Not long ago, someone he trusted, a partner, had stolen $3 million right under his nose, and the shock had fractured his image of humanity itself. He was 45 years old, a man with the world at his feet, yet now his view of people had grown bitter and suspicious. The theory he wanted to test tonight was almost childish in its simplicity: if given the chance, could anyone truly resist untold riches, especially when no one would know otherwise? Subscribe to the Untold channel and like it. Our vibrant stories will add years to your life. Join our storytelling club and tell us in the comments, where do you listen to them from? As Diana began dusting the tall shelves, pulling years of memories and dust from the surfaces, Jasmine wandered closer to Thomas's desk. She peered at the piles of cash, eyes wide with wonder. Never had she seen so much money in one place. Thomas, pretending to sleep, kept his breathing slow and steady, steeling himself against the disappointment he expected. In his mind, past betrayals played like haunting echoes. But Jasmine's next move would defy all of his jaded expectations. The girl didn't reach for the money, nor did her curiosity pull her into mischief. Instead, she noticed a certain disorder, a mess in the way the bills lay sprawled and crumpled. With quiet determination, she began to organize the notes, her tiny fingers sorting them by denomination, stacking them with impressive care, a softness and reverence that set her apart from any adult Thomas had ever known. "Mommy," she whispered, glancing up with pure innocence, "Mr. Thomas's money was all messy. I tidied it up just like you taught me to do with our coins at home." At that moment, Diana's focus snapped to her daughter, maternal worry etched on her face. "Jasmine, you mustn't touch the boss's things," she said, a hint of panic in her voice. Jasmine, unshaken, replied honestly, "But it was messy, Mom. I wanted him to wake up and see it all neat." Thomas felt a strange tightness in his throat, a wave of emotion he hadn't experienced in years. This child, whose life experience with money likely stopped at $20, had handled a fortune like the most precious treasure, all the while making sure her mother knew exactly what she had done. Her honesty was transparent, her innocence a window into a better world. And Thomas was struck motionless by the realization that something extraordinary was unfolding before him. What Thomas Mitchell couldn't have predicted was that Jasmine's simple act of honesty would ignite a chain reaction, one that would ultimately challenge the toxic prejudices circulating within his company, and would forever alter the lives of everyone involved. If you're the kind of person who thinks the greatest lessons only come from books or masterminds, prepare yourself. Sometimes, it's the youngest among us who teach what it truly means to live with integrity. In the weeks after this night, Thomas became a silent observer once more, not of piles of cash, but of the daily rhythms of Diana and Jasmine's lives. He learned Diana worked around the clock, cleaning at the company until dawn, then heading to a doctor's office for another full shift. Jasmine, ever the dutiful daughter, would study her homework in reception areas or play quietly, never a disturbance, always an inspiration. Thomas found himself increasingly touched by the lessons Diana passed on to Jasmine. "We always return what isn't ours, even if no one's watching," he overheard Diana gently instruct her daughter. "Our honesty is worth more than money." For Diana, these words were forged by hardship. Orphaned at 9 and shuffled through foster care, she'd worked her way through high school but could never afford college. When she became pregnant at 22, the child's father vanished, leaving her to raise Jasmine alone, proud and fiercely independent, refusing any handouts labeled as charity. All the while, Thomas was quietly changing Diana's circumstances, ordering HR to increase her wages under the pretense of a category adjustment. His gesture was discreet, but not everyone in the company failed to notice. Unbeknownst to Thomas, his quiet support for Diana and Jasmine attracted unwanted scrutiny. Richard Blackwood, the vice president of operations, a man aged 50, raised with privilege, and influential thanks to family shares, soon caught wind of the pay increase. During a stuffy boardroom meeting, Richard brought his suspicions bluntly to the surface. "Thomas, why are we wasting extra money on cleaning staff, especially on that specific employee?" Richard asked with an edge in his tone meant to belittle. "Diana is an excellent professional," Thomas retorted, maintaining a veneer of composure. Richard laughed dismissively, his prejudice transparent. "You need to understand where these people belong. Give them a little extra, and soon they'll want the whole vault. It's just in their nature." Thomas felt anger simmering inside him, but swallowed it. Richard's social power stemmed from his position as the founder's son. Richard's bigotry was tolerated by the board, who weighed his opinions against his financial clout. Besides, Richard continued cruelly, "She brings that child here. What kind of mother exposes a child to this environment? She clearly doesn't have a proper family structure." That evening, Thomas would witness something that finally pushed him too far. Richard, working late, crossed paths with Diana in the hallway. Threats and veiled insults poured from him, accusing her of manipulating the system and demanding she remove Jasmine from the premises. "Your job is to clean and be invisible. Nothing else," Richard hissed. Diana, pale but steadfast, shielded Jasmine, who stood silent behind her, frightened by the man's aggression. Thomas, watching from a distance through his office camera system, felt rage burn through his usual cool demeanor. This wasn't just workplace bullying, this was hate laid bare. Richard Blackwood had crossed an unforgivable threshold, and Thomas knew he couldn't merely stand by. That night, Thomas made the kind of decision that would ripple through the company like an earthquake. He would fight back, not just for Diana and Jasmine, but for every vulnerable soul subjected to cruelty. What Richard failed to realize was that his behavior, including the confrontation, had been recorded by the very security system he had once insisted be installed to monitor staff. Now, his own venomous words were being catalogued, ready to become evidence. But Thomas was not satisfied with recorded proof alone. He wanted Richard's downfall to be unmistakable, public, and so absolute that no one would ever dare replicate his cruelty again. Every humiliation Richard inflicted only fed Thomas's appetite for justice, awakening something that had long lain dormant inside him, a righteous fury that demanded action. Richard, blinded by arrogance and privilege, failed to see that each step he took, each insult he spat, was tying a noose around his own future. And Thomas, a billionaire now fueled by a new purpose, was prepared to show that sometimes, the true power in a company isn't held by those with legacy, it's held by those who choose to defend what's right. As the days turned, Thomas reached out for help from Marcus Chun, a former FBI investigator skilled in exposing corruption in corporate jungles. "Marcus, I need your services again," Thomas said gravely. The fight for real justice was about to begin, and the first line of battle would be drawn not in the boardroom, but in the shadows where bullying and manipulation had festered unchecked. Marcus Chun had always been a man who sought truth in the murkiest corners of human nature, a private investigator whose methods were as precise as they were relentless. When Thomas called, Marcus dropped everything. He arrived at Mitchell Enterprises under the cloak of night, his lean frame blending into the dark glass and steel of the building as if part of its architecture. Their first meeting was held away from prying eyes. Thomas greeted Marcus in the basement utility corridor, steeped in the whirring of machines that kept the empire running, a mechanical heartbeat mirroring Thomas's own anxious pulse. "I need this to be swift and undeniable," Thomas whispered, pressing a flash drive into Marcus's hand. On it, hours of security footage, accounting logs, and emails, all meticulously compiled by Thomas over the years, proof not only of Richard's outburst but of a pattern of subtle sabotage. Marcus's eyes narrowed in concentration. He'd spent decades parsing the difference between accidental error and systematic malice. "You did the right thing, Thomas. Not just for Diana and her daughter, but for every worker who's lived in fear here. I'll expose Richard, but I'll dig deeper. If there's more rot under the surface, I'll unravel every thread." For Thomas, this was the moment he allowed hope to return to his vision for the company, a place where loyalty meant more than heritage, and where power wouldn't continue to breed cruelty unchecked. Before Marcus left for his first round of interviews and data dives, Thomas asked him to watch a particular piece of footage, Jasmine tidying the massive pile of cash. "I want you to understand what real integrity looks like in action," Thomas said, his voice heavier than ever. Marcus watched, silent, then nodded. "We often think power comes from those at the top, but the strongest moral force sometimes starts with a child willing to do the right thing." With Marcus now on the hunt, the company's secrets, both shameful and inspiring, were inching closer to daylight. While Marcus worked in the shadows, Diana struggled daily to shield Jasmine from the fallout of Richard's cruelty. Diana had always dreamed of giving Jasmine a life where adversity built character, not bitterness, but now her faith was stretched thin. At home, she buried her fears in late-night tea, cradling Jasmine and whispering stories about kindness, their fortress against the world's ugliness. Jasmine, bright-eyed but keenly observant, sensed the tension radiating from her mother. She began asking gentle questions of her own. "Mom, why did Mr. Richard say those mean things? You work so hard. Don't people see that?" Diana, caught between honesty and the urge to protect, answered with trembling calm. "Some people, darling, don't realize how much strength it takes to keep going. But we don't let their words change who we are." Days at Mitchell Enterprises became an emotional balancing act. Diana would smile at Thomas, grateful for the small mercies, the surprise bonuses on her paycheck, the respectful nods in the hallway, but inside she braced herself for each shift, never knowing when Richard might appear or whether Jasmine would come home asking tougher questions. In these moments of fear and uncertainty, Diana clung to Jasmine's innocence as her anchor. There was one night, after Jasmine fell asleep, when Diana wept quietly, the weight of loneliness settling over her. She wished, wistfully and achingly, for a world where her daughter wouldn't have to learn resilience so early. But every morning, she stood tall again, determined that neither poverty nor prejudice would corrode the heart of the girl she had raised. Thomas, though now aware of Diana's struggles, remained at a respectful distance. Each interaction was laced with a new understanding. Real transformation sometimes begins in silence, with those who carry burdens unseen. Inside Mitchell Enterprises, the atmosphere subtly began to shift as Marcus's investigation gained momentum. Word of Richard's aggression had already trickled through the grapevine. Some employees became more guarded, others more daring in their support for Diana. The janitorial staff, many of whom had endured years of dismissive treatment, found courage in Diana's integrity and Thomas's quiet acknowledgement of her dignity. One evening, Marcus quietly approached Diana in the break room, where she sat tracing out tomorrow's cleaning routes. "Miss Flores, may I speak with you?" Marcus's tone was gentle, carrying the weight of someone who had seen too many broken spirits but still believed in restoration. Diana's hands shook as she agreed, casting anxious glances over her shoulder. "My work here is to protect people like you, not just uncover wrongdoing," Marcus assured. "Will you tell me about Richard? Has this kind of thing happened before?" Diana hesitated, old fears resurfacing, memories of foster homes where trust was currency she never had, but Marcus's patient waiting drew words from her slowly. "He's threatened me, and others, for years. Mostly with words, sometimes with threats of firing. He thinks we're disposable." "And Jasmine?" Marcus pressed softly. Diana's voice broke for the first time. "She's just a child. She shouldn't have to see this. I bring her because I have no one else, no daycare, no family, and she helps me when she can. I teach her to be honest, but it's hard when the world isn't." Marcus nodded, jotting notes. "I promise, this ends soon. And Jasmine won't have to bear these scars." Diana's relief was so palpable that Marcus felt a surge of urgency. Now the investigation was not just about justice, but redemption. As Marcus compiled evidence against Richard, Thomas began to see Mitchell Enterprises with new eyes. He walked the corridors, listening to staff stories, realizing that Diana's plight wasn't unique. Many employees navigated unspoken tensions, balancing their dignity against the risks of speaking out. Human resources staff reported a subtle uptick in requests for mediation, indirect signs of unrest. Thomas summoned his top managers for a closed-door meeting, determined to confront the hostile culture head-on. He opened the session not with accusations, but with a question: what does integrity mean to you inside these walls? Most managers offered platitudes, their answers rehearsed. Except Jenny Liu, head of payroll, who spoke unvarnished. "People want to belong here, but they have to feel safe, emotionally, financially, and physically. When you let bullies run free, the rest lose hope. That's not just bad for morale, it's bad for business." Her words echoed through the room, reminding Thomas how rare candor was in the boardroom. He vowed to make Jenny's voice his compass. Meanwhile, Marcus's work reached new heights, cross-referencing Richard's emails with HR complaints, reviewing reluctance in staff to log formal grievances, and tracing a web of intimidation that sent shockwaves far beyond the cleaning staff. Thomas felt his resolve harden. If the price of restoring integrity was confronting uncomfortable truths, then he was finally ready to pay. As the investigation neared its climax, Richard grew wary. News of Marcus's quiet inquiries reached him, feeding his paranoia. He stormed through the office, demanding loyalty checks and grilling staff about what they'd told the investigator. His tactics backfired. Rather than inspire fear, Richard only deepened the divide between himself and the rest of the company. On a rainy Thursday night, Thomas called Diana into his office. The invitation, delivered with uncommon warmth, caught Diana by surprise. Jasmine, always at her mother's side, entered the room with wide, searching eyes. "Diana, I want you to know, you and Jasmine are safe here." "Changes are coming," Thomas began, voice thick with emotion. "Mitchell Enterprises must be a place where honesty is honored, not punished. You've taught me more about integrity than I learned in 30 years at the top. Tonight, I'm putting that lesson into action." Thomas outlined what was about to happen. Richard would face formal action for his conduct, and there would be a new code of ethics developed with input from staff at every level, including Diana, if she wished. Diana pressed her hands to her heart, overwhelmed. Jasmine, not fully grasping the gravity, hugged Thomas's leg. The gesture, simple and pure, marked a turning point. Thomas was no longer a remote authority, he was an ally. As Diana left the office, hope squinted through her burdens for the first time in years. Change, so often just a whispered rumor, was finally becoming real at Mitchell Enterprises. Days after the pivotal meeting with Diana, a restless energy swept through Mitchell Enterprises. News spread quickly: a formal investigation was underway, and this time, it wasn't an empty gesture. Employees looked at each other with shared anticipation and anxiety. Perhaps, for the first time, there was real accountability on the horizon. Richard Blackwood, meanwhile, could no longer mask his growing desperation. Gone was his commanding swagger, replaced now with a haggard defensiveness. He tried to rally allies within upper management, employing old tactics of intimidation and leveraging favors owed. Yet, the tide was turning. Those who once bowed to his authority began to distance themselves, fearing association with a sinking ship. Even those who had tolerated his prejudice for the sake of their own security now saw that their silence would soon be a liability. Marcus Chun was relentless. He assembled a report bulletproof in its evidence, a timeline of behavioral misconduct, documentation of threatening emails, testimonies from past and current employees, and cross-checked footage showing Richard's outbursts and vindictive acts. The report didn't just focus on one explosive moment, it showed a systemic abuse rooted in Richard's unchecked privilege. Meanwhile, Diana noticed a subtle but meaningful shift. Cleaning supplies were no longer rationed, overtime requests were processed without delay, and for the first time, management greeted her in the corridors with something resembling respect. Jasmine, too, noticed her mother's lighter steps and occasional humming, sensing that the gray weight pressing on their lives was finally lifting. All while, Thomas prepared a company-wide meeting, a town hall where transparency would no longer just be a corporate buzzword, but a lived experience and a promise for the future. The atmosphere in the company auditorium was electric as employees filtered in, many clutching notepads or nervously whispering to one another. Diana and Jasmine sat together in the back row, joined by other members of the cleaning crew, all conscious that this was more than a meeting, it was a reckoning. Thomas stood at the podium with Marcus Chun flanking him and Jenny Liu, the payroll manager, by his side. It was Thomas who spoke first, his voice clear yet touched by the weight of personal truth. We gather here not just to address what's wrong but to commit ourselves to what must be right. No more will any person at Mitchell Enterprises be made to feel small, unseen, or powerless. The projection screen flickered to life, displaying undeniable evidence, excerpts from Marcus's report, clips of Richard's tirades, anonymized employee testimonials recounting years of quiet suffering. A hush fell over the crowd as Thomas continued, some institutions believe that privilege should never be questioned. But I believe that privilege should be earned through compassion and humility. Richard was summoned to stand before the assembly. In that moment, stripped of his customary authority, his guilt was no longer a matter of opinion but of public record. The board, acting on the evidence with unprecedented swiftness, announced his suspension pending dismissal and future legal action. Cheers and applause broke out, mingled with tears, relief, and laughter. For Diana, the feeling was surreal, a confirmation of all her years of diligent honesty. Jasmine squeezed her mother's hand, whispering, "You're brave, Mommy." This wasn't just the end of Richard's reign, it was the beginning of a cultural reset that reached even further than Thomas imagined. With Richard gone, Thomas launched a series of reforms that transformed the day-to-day experience for every member of his company, but none more so than for those whose voices had been ignored or suppressed. He established a new committee, the Integrity Council, selecting staff members from all departments, including custodians, junior clerks, and mid-level managers, everyone contributing equally. Diana was hesitant when approached to serve. She had never imagined being in a position where her opinion would shape company policy, but Thomas recognized in her a perspective uniquely qualified to safeguard the future. "Your story, your experience, is our new foundation," Thomas assured her, handing her the first set of proposals drafted by the council. "What if I'm not ready?" Diana asked, vulnerable but resolute. "You already proved your readiness," Thomas said, referencing both her honesty and her determination to protect Jasmine. "Your courage set this in motion." The Integrity Council began meeting weekly, dissecting proposals, sharing personal stories, and setting stricter protocols for staff accountability. Marcus attended as an advisor, ensuring that the council's decisions were rooted not only in compassion but also in practical, lasting change. Among their first recommendations was the child presence policy, allowing parents to bring their children to safe workspaces when necessary, a direct outcome of Diana's experiences. Jasmine, now a symbol of honest innocence at Mitchell Enterprises, even inspired an annual Day of Integrity where staff nominated peers for acts of kindness or honesty, with recognition spanning from custodial staff to executive officers. This was more than redemption, this was the rewriting of Mitchell Enterprises' legacy. As months passed, the tangible effects of the reforms became visible, not just in policies, but in the everyday culture. Diana found herself joining workgroups, helping to plan celebratory events, and testing new support programs designed for employees facing economic or familial hardship. For Jasmine, whose life had been shaped by her mother's resolve and Thomas's faith in her innocence, these changes meant stability, safety, and a growing belief in the goodness of community. Jasmine also became unofficially beloved by staff, her bright pink gloves a cheerful hallmark in every hallway. She would greet office workers with respectful hellos, sometimes helping to tidy up meeting rooms when her mother was busy. People in the company began to see small acts of kindness as powerful, their own humanity reflected in Jasmine's gentle example. Thomas, meanwhile, found his own healing in this new environment. His empire no longer felt cold and distant, it was a place where people's stories mattered. He often walked past Diana and Jasmine in the mornings, making time for real conversations, sharing breakfast pastries, or simply listening to their thoughts. These interactions brought him the rare, bittersweet joy of rediscovered trust. The financial health of the company also improved. Productivity rose as staff felt empowered and protected, absenteeism declined, and Mitchell Enterprises gained recognition from business journals for their employee-centric revolution. But the most meaningful change was quieter, deeper, a sense that, for the first time, every person inside the company could be seen, heard, and valued. The annual Day of Integrity soon approached, a celebration that now carried enormous weight across the company. Diana was asked to give a speech, a daunting prospect for someone whose voice had so long been quieted by circumstance. Nervous but inspired, she wrote late into the night, wanting to capture not just her gratitude, but the lesson Jasmine had taught her, and, in turn, the entire organization. When the day arrived, the sun spilled through the windows of the main hall, employees gathered from every department, from warehouse staff to senior executives. Jasmine, perched in her favorite seat, smiled at her mother, offering support the way only a child can, a sparkling confidence born of unconditional love. Standing before the crowd, Diana spoke with a tremulous voice that grew stronger with every sentence. My journey began with hardship. I worked late hours, and my only wish was that my daughter, no matter what, learn that integrity is greater than riches. In this company, I worried each day that kindness would be mistaken for weakness, that honesty would bring only hardship. But this year, I learned that our greatest asset isn't found in the bank vault. It's found in the hearts of our children, in simple acts of straightening a pile of bills or speaking out against a bully. There was a hush, then thunderous applause. Colleagues hugged each other, some wiping tears. Jasmine leapt from her chair, running to her mother's arms, her pink gloves still bright, her future now woven into the fabric of an organization that had risen, at last, to protect its own. Diana looked out over her new family, her voice breaking, "Thank you for hearing us. For letting us believe again." As spring unfolded, a new spirit of openness blossomed throughout Mitchell Enterprises. What had once been a company stifled by hierarchy was now a living testament to the strength found in mutual respect, and the power of second chances. Diana's speech continued to resonate, not just as an inspiring anecdote but as a catalyst for self-reflection at every level of the organization. In the days following the Day of Integrity, employees from departments as far-flung as shipping and IT reached out to Diana with gratitude and shared stories. Many confided long-held anxieties, revealing the pressures they had faced under the previous culture, overlooked contributions, fears of retaliation, and the burden of hiding their true selves. Some had suffered in silence, never daring to hope things might change. Diana listened to them all, patiently, gently, humbly. Empathy became her signature, a quiet revolution that turned pain into compassion and isolation into connection. Company leadership took these stories seriously. Under Thomas's guidance, a new set of systemic changes was launched. Management underwent regular empathy and diversity training. Anonymous feedback channels were made more robust, and the Integrity Council gained real power to challenge decisions made at any level. For every policy change, Diana's perspective was sought, no longer out of courtesy, but as a trusted benchmark of fairness. One afternoon, Thomas paid a visit to Diana and Jasmine outside of work, a picnic lunch at the park, a gesture that spoke volumes about the company's transformation from cold corporate entity to a true community. They sat beneath blooming cherry trees, Jasmine chasing butterflies while Diana and Thomas spoke not as boss and employee, but as equals. Thomas confessed, "Your honesty taught me what leadership should really mean. I want to be worthy of the trust you've shown." Diana, warmed by gratitude, replied, "Perhaps trust is like these blossoms, it seems fragile, but with care, it's stronger than anyone realizes." In her new role on the Integrity Council, Diana felt a growing sense of purpose but also the anxiety that comes with newfound responsibility. She sometimes doubted whether she could balance her demanding life, single motherhood, 2 jobs, and now, the mantle of organizational change. At times, fatigue overwhelmed her, but every evening when Jasmine crawled into her lap and declared, "You're the bravest person I know," Diana remembered what all her struggle had been for. Jasmine, for her part, was thriving. She excelled in school, buoyed by the security of her mother's blossoming career and the sense of belonging she now felt at Mitchell Enterprises. The staff, seeing the positive transformation in Diana, extended genuine warmth to Jasmine as well. Teachers were invited to her school events, and co-workers often offered to watch Jasmine so Diana could participate fully in council meetings. It was as though the entire company, once a place of suspicion and closed doors, had become an extended, protective family. With each passing week, Diana's confidence in her new responsibilities grew. She chaired working groups, helped draft family-friendly initiatives, and attended its first labor negotiation as an advocate, using her story not as a source of pity, but of pride. Marcus Chun, impressed by her growth, nominated Diana for a local Community Builder award, positioning her as a role model for inclusive workplace transformation. For Thomas, Diana's ascent was deeply rewarding, not just for the company or for her, but for his own journey of redemption. He became a champion for leadership from unexpected places, often quoting Diana in executive workshops, "When you sweep aside what you think people can't do, you find what they're truly capable of." This new ethos began to ripple outward, attracting new talent, partnerships, and goodwill from the community. The larger business community began to take notice. Mitchell Enterprises, once considered a standard fixture of the city's economy, was suddenly the subject of news articles and features on responsible business. Reporters highlighted how a cleaning staff member's moment of honesty had sparked a transformation touching every corner of the company. Journalists interviewed Thomas about the dramatic changes, and he never hesitated to share credit. "Our success," he said before an audience at a leadership forum, "came not from a new product, but from an old value, integrity. The most important lesson I've learned is that every voice matters. Diana Flores taught me that. So did her daughter. They reminded us all of the standards we claim to champion." Diana was likewise interviewed, sometimes reluctantly, always humbly. When asked by a community radio host what advice she had for other workers facing hostile workplaces, she replied, "Don't give up hope. Even if it feels like you aren't seen, your truth will find a way." Sometimes, the smallest good deed becomes the start of something bigger than you ever imagined. Mitchell Enterprises soon partnered with local nonprofits to launch outreach programs, mentoring teens, offering scholarships to single parents, and providing stipends for vocational training. Jasmine, whose small gesture had been the catalyst, wore her trademark pink gloves to these events, inspiring other children to join in service projects. But the greatest reward came in the daily smiles and laughter echoing through the hallways of the company, the certainty that here, at least, justice and generosity had become more than slogans, they were living traditions. New traditions took root. The company's annual holiday party now included a gratitude wall for employees to post notes of thanks to one another. Diversity celebrations recognized and valued every culture and background represented among the staff. Even workplace conflicts were addressed with a blend of honesty and care, an outgrowth of the council's influence. Diana's life outside of work improved as well. No longer needing to work a second job, she spent more time with Jasmine, helping with schoolwork, taking art lessons together, even planning weekend adventures. The financial security allowed Diana to enroll in night classes, reigniting her long-dormant dream of earning a degree in social work. Jasmine thrived on her mother's example, dreaming out loud of someday helping children who, like her once, had needed a voice. Thomas, satisfied that his company was now a vessel for healing and hope, found his own world opening up. He rekindled a relationship with estranged siblings, inspired by Diana's forgiveness and the unity he witnessed among his staff. At an informal lunch, he told Diana, "I thought building success would mean building walls. But you showed me how much stronger we can be when we tear them down together." Every board meeting, every annual report now told this new story, not just of profits, but of progress, of people reclaimed from the margins, of a culture transformed not by circumstance, but by choice. And so, the story of Mitchell Enterprises wove itself into the city's narrative as a beacon, proof that integrity, even when tested to its limits, could redeem not only a wounded company but also the lives entwined within it. Diana's presence in the Integrity Council inspired similar councils in other firms. Jasmine's story was shared at schools and local charities as a lesson in honesty and courage. Life was not without new challenges, change invited skeptics, and sometimes those shaped by old habits still pushed back. But the difference was now unmistakable. No one, not even the most powerful in the company, was above accountability or beyond the reach of compassion. Complaints and concerns were handled swiftly, roots of injustice pulled before they became vines. The friendships forged across lines of class and rank outlasted the day's troubles. Employees, once strangers, became lifelines to each other. Diana and Thomas remained allies, confidants, bound not by a corporate ladder, but by mutual respect and a history transformed. Jasmine flourished, her simple honesty forever woven into the spirit of a company that learned, the hard way, what truly matters. And all because, on one seemingly ordinary evening, a child with pink gloves straightened a pile of messy bills instead of pocketing them. The real fortune that night wasn't in the vault, it was in the lesson she taught, in the conscience she awakened, in the family and company she helped to heal. The years that followed saw Mitchell Enterprises embody an ongoing journey toward justice and renewal. Under Thomas's vigilant care, the Integrity Council became institutionalized, a critical checkpoint for every significant decision the company made. Diana, once a newcomer, gradually emerged as a leader not just within the council but throughout the corporate community. Her old insecurities faded as she realized that empathy and lived experience, once signs of vulnerability, had become her greatest strengths. Jasmine, now several years older, grew up surrounded by role models from every walk of life. She visited her mother's workplace after school, often stopping by the council meetings, greeted by hugs and high fives. The pink gloves, having become iconic, were now too small for her growing hands but found a permanent home inside Thomas's glass office, preserved under a small plaque, "Where Integrity Begins." Anyone asking about them would hear the story, handed down like a treasured family fable. Inside and outside the walls of the company, Diana and Jasmine became involved in wider advocacy. They spoke at conferences, participated in local government hearings about family-friendly workplace legislation, and lent their support to battered workers looking for a way out of exploitation. Diana, now only months from earning her social work degree, used her story as a bridge, connecting her professional world with those still stuck on the wrong side of hope. Meanwhile, Jasmine's example was echoed by children from all backgrounds. Schools in the city ran writing contests themed on what honesty means to me. Employees at other companies took pride in small acts of goodness, championing what Diana and Jasmine had first demonstrated with such effortless grace. The effects rippled outward, unseen but deeply felt. Thomas's transformation was equally striking. Once a leader known for his cool detachment, he became a champion for workplace well-being, serving on national panels and setting benchmarks for corporate responsibility. He shared the Mitchell story at major conferences, never shying away from the company's troubled past or the pain caused by a leader's blind spots. Instead, he emphasized, it is never too late to change, so long as we have the humility to learn from those we once overlooked. Thomas was even approached by other CEOs for mentorship, many seeking advice on preventing the kind of toxic culture that once festered at Mitchell. He told them what Diana had told him: real power comes from transparency, and real wisdom from listening to every person under your roof. His relationship with Diana became a model, not of charity, but of partnership. They wrote a book together, part memoir, part guide, detailing the journey from distrust to trust, from silence to shared voice. Mitchell Enterprises continued to thrive, constantly evolving new programs for equity, mental health support, flexible work for families, and open leadership forums. The company, once scandal-ridden and scandal-proof, now wore its honesty proudly, imperfections and all. For Diana, the greatest reward was never the accolades or the press, but Jasmine's radiant happiness. Their home, once tense and uncertain, blossomed into a sanctuary brimming with laughter, music, and hope. Diana's academic success inspired Jasmine to dream of college herself. The cycles of hardship that had defined one generation were ending, ripple by ripple, in the next. As Jasmine approached her teenage years, she became increasingly aware of the story that had shaped her life, not just in legend but in lived experience. Teachers and friends sometimes treated her with awe, knowing her history, but Jasmine, humble and grounded by her mother's example, resisted the pedestal. She volunteered at local food banks, mentored younger children at the daycare once used by Diana, and continued meeting people with an open, searching heart. On the anniversary of the first Day of Integrity, Jasmine stood before the assembled company, her voice clear and steady. I didn't know that tidying up something small would change the world around me. My mom taught me to do what's right even when nobody's watching. But now I see, someone's always watching. The next person, the next child, learns from us. That message sparked a round of applause, and more than a few tears. Meanwhile, Diana took pride in each of Jasmine's milestones: her first acceptance letter, her first art show, her first big public speech. In her mother's eyes, Jasmine would always be the 6-year-old with pink gloves and a heart big enough for a world that sometimes felt so small. Yet now, she also saw the young woman Jasmine was becoming: resilient, wise, and never afraid to stand her ground. Life wasn't perfect, challenges still appeared. Mistakes were made, sometimes hard lessons had to be relearned, and the temptation to revert to old ways lurked during hard times. But Diana and Jasmine, backed by friends and a new extended family, never doubted that together they could weather any storm. As time passed, the city itself transformed. Other companies adopted similar integrity programs, and the lesson of Mitchell Enterprises was taught in local MBA courses: how a single act of honesty, made by someone invisible to power, can topple fear, change culture, and heal wounds. Diana completed her social work degree and began working part-time as a counselor and advocate. Her clients found comfort in her lived experience and practical advice. It is possible to rise, she told them, possible to change the nature of work and the meaning of dignity. Her support groups grew, and soon, Diana was able to bring Jasmine to advanced workshops, teaching mother and daughter alike that their journey, once marked by adversity, now radiated hope for others. Jasmine flourished in high school. She excelled in both academics and service, launching a small kindness project to encourage students to support one another. She gave speeches about the power of doing the right thing without reward. Local media followed her journey, and once a year, she and Diana would return to Mitchell Enterprises for the annual Day of Integrity, their presence symbolic, and, for many, aspirational. Thomas, now semi-retired, stayed on as a mentor to future leaders. He delighted in seeing new generations step forward, carrying forward the legacy of trust and courage he had learned, unexpectedly and blessedly late, from those who had once been invisible to him. The final chapter of this remarkable story was never about a single person, company, or even family. It was about a community reborn, about what happens when one heart dares to do what's right, and others dare to believe along with it. Years after that fateful night, after the vault incident, after the reckonings, after the reforms, Diana, Jasmine, and Thomas gathered in the company garden under a sprawling oak. It was the garden where workers now took their breaks and where the annual integrity pledges were signed. Thomas, now with touches of gray, turned to Diana and Jasmine. "None of us could have done this alone. The best part is, we never had to." Diana, gently touching Jasmine's hand, smiled. "We're not the same people anymore. We're better, all of us. Because of honesty. Because of each other." Jasmine, now a university student and community leader, grinned. "Remember, it's the little things that matter most. One honest act. One open heart. That's how revolutions start." The three sat together in the shade, laughter ringing out, a testament to the power of vulnerability, redemption, and love. And as the sun set, workers, friends, and families strolled through the gardens, the company itself breathing with new life. The legend of the pink gloves lived on, not as a story of what was lost or stolen, but as the eternal proof of what can never be bought: dignity, courage, and hope.